You can't be afraid to speak up. You cannot be afraid to use your words and use the knowledge and the wisdom that God has given and granted you to bring a better world into being. You cannot let fear, intimidation, manipulation, and persuasion incline to separate you from reality and trade it in for illusions and manipulation. The game of our world is one of 10,000 treasures. The material world is ran and treated like a confined prison system in which dwells beings and people whose spirits, corrupted by intentions and the nature, the lower drives of the human animal, have steadily built and compound over centuries a complex system constructed out of matter used to manipulate humanity into subservience, serving its needs and purposes. Throughout history, there have been many civilizations that have risen and fell as a result and consequence of those who cling to the material world and material possession. That word is key: possession. Matter is density. It is energy brought into its most dense state. Much like quicksand, it drags everything into a slow molasses-like pace. And some, realizing the development and the exploitable vulnerabilities of the human condition and human growth, have known this knowledge and utilize this knowledge to manipulate and influence this species for centuries, generation upon generation, building civilizations that act as a dominion and a plot of land that contain vulnerable, malleable human populaces. Always the intention of civilization has been to construct systems of operations that utilize people for their gifts and their talents, but inevitably and slowly over time, these civilizations, corrupted by the influences of power and dominion, become paths and avenues for the archaic designs and minds that use and utilize this lifetime, this planet, and the very source of matter to strike at the hearts and the very souls of innocence and connectivity in order to wound and scar and poison with depravity, to try to sever the connection to higher divinity and higher things, a higher understanding. It is called trauma-based mind control, and it is what we see in play in this modern day and age, being the key influence of why everyone remains steadily walking and goose-stepping in the direction of the next chapter of our dystopian novel that we call reality. There has always existed on our world dominions of power and influence that work through the connectivity of structures of civilization and the hoarding of knowledge and wisdom that implement the very structures of our lives, the parameters that steer the flock, the human species, the human civilization, in the directions to building and constructing and framing and the converting of civilization into a design that borderline something that exists within the human psyche and the deep subconscious. It is a projection and manifestation and a reflection of the subconscious shadow that plays out in the corruption of civilizations throughout time and memoriam and history. We see it repeated cyclically, and the nature of what takes place and transpires when humanity is bred into a condition of captivity for a prolonged period of time. Steadily, the gene pools and the influences around a society and civilization become corrupted by the very fabric and nature of the systems within it, the internal mechanisms of a civilization, society, and structure oftentimes become corrupted. What once was a home and a nesting ground and a place for community and connectivity steadily erodes and becomes an isolated prison cell, and a system that pipelines and streams productivity in captivity. It is civilization and societies that become corrupted by design and the nature of influence and power that steadily show the true face of what emerges from the architecture and the machinery of civilization. When the architects and the people in charge of a civilization become corrupted, so too it is their machination to see and mirror and reflect that corruption onto the very civilizational structure that they abide in. They grow within its confines and parameters, but use instead the very structure of civilization as an apparatus to act out the machinations of their minds. It becomes a projection of their darkest desires and fantasies and fantasias. Power provides opportunity and privilege that most in the structure and order of civilization would not have. And this power corrupts the subconscious mind, spilling over into reality where the deepest, darkest, suppressed intentions becomes too much to bear. And some take it upon them to accept the mantle of this dark nature, and they exploit the vulnerable and the weak and the innocent to enact out those machinations. The history and the reality of people in powerful positions of authority throughout our planet will trace back to lineages having to do with bloodlines and the influence at play of preserving and maintaining blood lineages. This is all esoteric and symbolic. These blood lineages are not rooted or seated necessarily in any one race, religion, and creed, but they come from the same diatribe of influences. What we would know in the modern day and age reflected back to the earliest influences of the building and the structuring of societies and civilizations that evolved and flourished into the West came originally from the Middle Eastern areas. These diatribes of people would be associated and affiliated with sects of people that traveled up and down that area. You would call them Babylon. You would call them Canaanite, or the tribe of Canaan. Is the preservation of a more vampiric influence, not like the mythological monsters that are in our folklore and fairy tales. Is an influence of the deeper, depraved, more Promethean nature of humanity that has been preserved and protected behind closed doors, as one that preys upon humanity. In a way, this could parallel certain existing diatribes that exist around the world to this day. The nature of the Aghori Sadhus in India is something that parallels this, that is out in the open. But they reject the comfort and the commodity and the hiding behind closed doors of what the reality of such influences being gatekept and barred, and shunning the light of awareness and consciousness of humanity. They reject that. They reject that nature because it is to hide from understanding that the very lower aspects of human being as an animal, as biological species on this planet, also in tow, is connected to divinity. In a lot of aspects, they're the lightest side of the darker side, these Agori Sadhus. And even still, they're notoriously known for eating and utilizing the cremated remains of human beings, animal sacrifice, blood and feces drinking. These are all ritualistic practices that they undertake to deepen their connection to divinity by taking on its most loathsome and rejected aspects. It is, in a lot of essence, an occult practice in itself, but even they do not practice what some of the more depraved nature of who runs and controls the planet practice, and we are steadily becoming aware of this. The reality of the nature of this hidden, unseen influence that has existed and been unearthed and dragged into the light during this time and age has its tendrils in every major organizational operation of our modern society, and it needs to be addressed. Our entire paradigm of existing on this planet with the technologies at hand were strategically influenced over years of predeterministic plans and the manipulation of markets, the manipulation of the roles and the jobs that we play in society to construct and build a civilization that acts twofold. That we slowly see the implementations and the movement moving in the direction of steadily revealing the true nature of our modern age and paradigm civilization and just what they are and just what they are about. The financial structure and the demand of how our civilizations work and operate exploit the vulnerability and the understanding that we as human beings, as communal creatures, have to undertake and shoulder the burden of helping aid and provide services and skills and trades to one another to sustain our civilizations. We have an obligation to caretake one another in order to be mutually symbiotic and beneficial to one another's survival. Our modern age and paradigm knows and understands this design of how human civilization comes into bloom, into flourishing, and it exploits this vulnerability and weakness by constructing around it an elaborate civilization that basically markets and profiteers the perfect living situation. In the West, it was called the American Dream. As George Carlin said, it's called the American Dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. On the surface, America is a cozy grouping of combinations of modern suburbs for families and mass-spanning cityscapes and sprawls that have to do with business and commerce. That is the surface level intention of what America is. Beyond that surface level intention, it's a holding pen as a facility that uses humanity as exploitable labor for whatever it needs at a given time and place to facilitate and always prop up its political systems of governance, its military, and its financial assets and resources. America is a corporate conglomerate-owned cattle pen that keeps its populace in a perpetual state of motion by creating and steadily changing and manipulating the markets. It utilizes the numerical values and principles of material goods and services to have a play on kind of social class and caste systems that exist in different time periods. And what is this meant to produce? Through marketing and advertising and conditioning people to live within the parameters of our society and civilization, it can steadily groom and influence malleable percentiles of the youth populace by generating different ideas of time periods and different constructs and concepts in different ideas and time periods. Our civilization can raise and change the different conscious aspects of human awareness generationally throughout time to exploit its weaknesses and vulnerabilities. The youth is the most vulnerable in America because the youth goes through a state of nascence and adolescence where it is completely malleable and adaptable to be and act in whatever way the society deems and demands and determines. There's an ironic, funny thing taking place in most of the civilizations that have to do with Western architecture right now. Some places in the world where Western architecture doesn't exist, it's more out in the open. But as far as the West goes, the West is a more elaborate construct. Here's the thing. You have a financial degradation of society that steadily keeps and demands that people continuously work and continue repeating the process of working to survive. You are always in a state of survival. Nothing is set in stone. The market is completely malleable. It can be manipulated. It can be dissolved. It can be changed out. With the advent of technology, things are more demanding than they ever have been. And because technology plays a role in its implementation of our modern paradigm, you have to go through technology as a conduit and avenue for being in the very structure of civilization. That demands not only additional monetary costs, but it also demands that your life in itself is marketable, is advertisable. Technology provides a perfect avenue and conduit for creating malleable human beings in this modern day and age. Your life is a subscription-based service, and it's continuing to roll out in that way for the direction things are going. Why is this? A populace that is vulnerable at all given times cannot get a leg up and change the paradigm of influences for how the system works and operates. In fact, if the entire system was to just stop and collapse and burn and decay, it would leave everyone in a state of collateral damage. And not only that, the system collapsing and crumbling in on itself would just guarantee effects similar to the Library of Alexandria for our wealthy, elite, established New World Order. It would have the same effect. It would completely destroy any and all evidence or repercussion if the society and civilization were to steer off course and veer off the direction that has already been set. The pathology that exists in the modern day age and paradigm and why people continue to repeat the same circumstances is twofold. Not only are they influenced and somatized by this modern day and age, you have no ability to do anything but comply with this modern day and age. This plays into why people aren't having kids as well. Two-pronged reason. If a society and a civilization can continuously exploit you by keeping you perpetually in a state of survival, and you suddenly undergo something in life that sets you back from the ability to continue providing the services, if you are no longer exploitable, well, you become useless to the state and to the country and to the dynamic at play. Say you have family. Say you cannot work and go through the system that provides, the scant amount of care that also makes you vulnerable to the state's influences. And the state has strategically designed the perfect system to just remove children from familial homes and familial dynamics, with the courts being corrupted and the government being corrupted and the influences at play in this modern day and age. They could basically manufacture whatever strategic excuse they have to remove kids from families. And this modern day and age and paradigm of influences that we see at play and what is being exposed, maybe there's a reason and a purpose for that. The largest level and degree of human trafficking has transpired and taken place on this planet in the last 5 years, right under everyone's noses. And we have little to no information about it. The emerging and the exposure of the systems at play around us in this modern day and age make it clear and evident and obvious what our civilization is. It's a breeding program. It's a cattle pen. It's a manufactorum of human subservient labor. It is by all means a plantation that doubles for the protocol of breeding up generations of exploitable, vulnerable children that when they no longer serve a purpose can be disposed of or pumped into the system to keep it operational. Our entire system is not just a prison. It's not just a cattle pen for humans to exist in. It's a malleable mechanical process that doubles and works for the wealthy and the powerful and the two-tier systems that exist within it to exploit vulnerabilities and weakness perfectly, surgically, scientifically. It's using technology to build and design the equivalent of a panopticon, so anything you say can and will be used against you, and anything you can't say can be manufactured in a way that paints you in a negative light. The inmates run this asylum. The reality is the human condition and the circumstance of all the people that we hold our morality to, the people in high positions of power and authority, who do they serve? They serve the system. They serve in your business structures, whether they know it or not. They're participatory in it. They serve in the structures that keep you confined to the 40 to 60-hour work week that you live. You need to pay the percentile of taxes that not even in the medieval era people had to give in order to survive. To them, money's a game, by the way. They don't need money to do what they do. They coast on the backs and the labors and the efforts of others to keep the system running and operational. And they give you a little cut of the pie to somatize you from the reality of what this is. They work in your hospitals. They work for your pharmaceutical industries. They work for the very structure that sells you all the products and commodities that you need. They work for the transportation systems that exist globally, not just in your country and nation, but are at times responsible for the trafficking of human beings behind closed doors. They work in your militaries, they work in your churches, they work in your police forces. There's not a single part of our society and civilization that does not have people embedded in the system that act as footholds and thresholds for the control mechanisms. If you work in this system, you are a part of a system. If you were born in this system, you are exploitable in this system. The system is strategically and elaborately set up so that it is a lose-lose, zero-sum game. You're not supposed to win in this system. You're supposed to be a slave in this system. You're supposed to live a lifetime burying your heads in the sand and getting the little amenities and opportunities that keep you exploitable and doing the work of keeping the system perpetuated. I'm not Neo in the Matrix. I'm not Agent Smith, by the way. I'm just some gimpy little, weird, autismo, bisexual kid, basically. I mean, I'm 27, but I'm still pretty young, who needed to know why the world was so fucked up, like many people. I always felt like I was going through different influences that were made to make me feel vulnerable and demonized, and now I see why. because the system is elaborately set up to be able to make a scapegoat out of anyone and anything that isn't in a position of power and authority that could be malleably influenced through language. The very structure of our language and our set of law is malleable to exploit weaknesses and vulnerability in human nature. It's entirely set up to feed on manipulating emotion, controlling emotion. And only the truth, which we are all indebted to when we live in a structure that feeds and lives and thrives and parasitizes off lies. For every lie that we share, we're indebted to the truth. So only the truth can shatter and break the illusion. I'm no saint. I can gladly and wholeheartedly admit I've made mistakes in life, and I am more a sinner than a saint. But whether you follow Jesus or the Buddha or Krishna, whatever you believe in, the reality of the world that you're living in is that it's a machine architecture that could only be defined as something built in the mind of somebody who would take and undertake the mantle of an antichrist. It's an inversion of all the principles of human nature and human biology meant to exploit the truthful, the vulnerable, the innocent. It is meant to bring harm and suffering. It catalyzes evolution through this adaptation and pushes the species forward artificially at an advancing and progressively faster pace. Why? To stir the genetics. It controls the breeding pool through economics. It's entirely designed as a breedership program. Don't tell me our country is anything profoundly sacred, because it's not. It's entirely inverted. It has Masonic designs in its very architecture. It has hints alluding to principles and ideas of Egypt and Rome and Greece embedded within it. It has influences having to do with time, Chronos, Saturn, and Saturn worship embedded in it. All of these symbolically are worship of death and entropy, darkness, reaping the harvest, the time pressing forward and grinding steadily against us until we are all dust is the only constant other than change on this planet. Our bureaucracies and the nature of how our planet are set up through civilizations all worship this entropic ideal. They capitalize on this ideal. It's about exploiting the youth, the innocence, the vulnerability, and corrupting it, and then casting it to the wayside, used for the elements to take back. This is why you see the emerging problem of homelessness and the impact that it's having on the fact that most Americans are struggling to survive, and that probably is by strategic design too. Why are people being pressed into poverty? Well, they're no longer useful when they start noticing the architecture for what it is. But the new generations that are under constant pipelining and streaming of media influences, well, they're yet to be exposed to the seedier nature of the corruption at play on this planet. It's all about mind control and hypnosis. You might not believe in these things, but how often do you spend your time behind a screen? What depths and lengths and measures would you take beyond selling your very soul, creating a condition that exploits the planet and treats it as another matter-based resource, down to the very people, down to the very elements of the soil, to hide your secret? As George Carlin said, it's a big club and you and I ain't in it, and that's for good reason and good purpose. Most people living on this planet just want a semblance of peace and harmony, but always there have been those hiding and lurking in the shadows to try to manipulate and exploit the vulnerabilities of man and mankind and human nature. The game of depravity and all the things that transpire and take place behind closed doors, the corruption, It's their half of the game. It's an esoteric game that has to do with rejecting the light and trying to corrupt a populace so that it's completely malleable and influenceable behind strategic human design. It's cut off from its own understanding and knowledge that it is a divine conduit that God sees through. That's what a human being is, whether you believe it or not. Consciousness is a phenomenon that we cannot explain and express through human words. Every elaborate structure that is born from our throats is just a semblance of expression that only is a mirror, a small fractal of that understanding. It has been the intention of many generations of people behind closed doors to exploit the vulnerability and weakness of the innocent and utilize them and act upon the world as a god in their own image. The Pharisees and Hierophants and the prophets have existed throughout our planet's course in history. Some have maintained and sought to protect truth, to defend the innocent and the vulnerable. Others have used the guise and veneer of robes, hats, positions of power and authority to exploit that. The aspects of what's at play in our modern day and age in society and civilization after twofold world wars and the events that have transpired after it were always about using and exploiting the advancing and progressing of technology built in war times to make a more controlled, malleable populace, to erase and erode the fabric of history by strategically exploiting the youth, to drop every preconceived notion and ideal that they ever had, to cause and catalyze a reset of human consciousness and to steer it towards the lower animalistic drives that the profane utilize to influence and exploit our modern civilizations, and the influence behind them are a slave-making protocol to exploit and harm the innocent. They are by all measure and metric what you would call demonic, what you would call satanic. They're not influences that have to do with the duality of the nature of light and shadow, because these influences hide in plain sight. They exist and exploit both the light and the shadow aspects. They wear guises and veneers and play through a game of manipulation and strategic illusion.